He is, for me at least, the people's knight, Sir Angus Scott, and he joins us now. Angus, you're a voice artist and a presenter. You're not a politician of any kind. If you have any politics, they're the opposite of mine, you told me. So how come you and I end up in double harness on this?
I think it's very telling that we are indeed in this position. 2003, I was a young man. I served in the Territorial Army. I was, in many ways, the polar opposite to yourself, George. And 2003, Tony Blair took us to war. I was apoplectic. It just, well, for all the reasons that you have very eloquently, and much more eloquently than I can ever dream of displaying, explained why that was deeply, deeply wrong. And I think that's indicative, and the petition itself has proven to the world that this wasn't about politics. It was about what was morally right and what was morally wrong. And it was so morally wrong that it has united every shade of the political spectrum in saying in one big voice, this was deeply wrong on every possible level. And it's not just political. I've had fabulous messages from very refined ladies in the shires, people who have no interest in politics whatsoever. And they have thanked me personally. Thank you for giving me a voice, because this was so deeply wrong. I just had to join in this clamour to tell the world, to send a message to the world how utterly wrong this whole thing is.
Well, as you describe it, it's an uncanny echo of the Great March on February 15, 2003, which also was attended by every shade of political opinion, including many refined old ladies holding banners, "Make tea, not war," and so on. It was one of the most extraordinary cultural events of my lifetime. It was the coming together of the best of the British people. And of course, everyone on the march was representing several others, their own families not least, that they had left behind at home in all the parts of the kingdom. It's odd, isn't it, that Tony Blair has now twice been the lightning rod that has united the country against him.
Absolutely. And I think the big thing that has struck me is just the depth of passion across the board. I cannot think of any other human being since 1945 who has evoked such deep, universal emotion across our nation. And the reason is very clear. It's because of, for me, it's two words. One word is lies, obviously, but the biggest word of all is betrayal. One of the worst sins any human being could do against another human being is betrayal in any context. He has managed to betray just about every section of our society. He betrayed the left, he betrayed our armed forces, and the list goes on. And as a result of that, that's why I think this depth of feeling has just manifested itself so powerfully. And more importantly, under any other issue, after 14 years, it would be long forgotten. It might be bubbling away quietly, but it's forgotten. The fact that we are a decade and a half down the line, and suddenly over 1 million people within a few days have just come out and said, with a level of anger, it just proves just how significant this is. And likewise, actually how significant this message is, because it doesn't come from any one section of society. It comes from our good society as a whole.
Why do you think it took 14 years? My thesis that I adumbrated earlier in the show is that Prince Philip would have been dead against it. He had a particular dislike of New Labour, of Tony Blair, over the Diana funeral issue and all kinds of other things. I think that Prince Philip would have put the kibosh on this. Now that he's no longer with us, somebody somewhere in the palace has prevailed on the Queen to take an action which is really quite self-harming for her and for the monarchy.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point, and it does actually raise a lot of discussions around this whole area. Why have they waited 14 years? I think that in itself is a tacit admission from the palace and the establishment that it's wrong. If it wasn't, they would have done it 14 years ago. So clearly, they have held back thinking, we are now in some form of quandary, because actually, from what I understand, it's not, obviously it's not a gift of the government, it is the gift of the palace, but it's actually not, it's not the Queen hasn't sat down and said, right, I want to give Tony Blair an award. Apparently it's convention, it's convention, it's almost an automatic honour to prime ministers.
Well, it would have been a convention 14 years ago, Angus.
Exactly, and that's my point. If it was a convention, and if he frankly deserved it, he should have got it 14 years ago. The fact that they haven't, I think, implies that they know in the palace that it's deeply wrong, and they tried to. I think they've strung it down the line as long as they dare. And with all due respect to the Queen, and I am a very staunch monarchist, I think, unfortunately, as you say, with the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh, that. He was a very steadying force, and the Queen has never, in 70 years, ever put one foot wrong. Unfortunately, biology is biology. She is a 94-year-old lady. I sense that the weight of decision-making has moved more to her advisors than the Queen itself, and I'm being very presumptuous here, apologies if it offends the palace and all that, but biology is biology, and she would not have made this decision 10 years ago. But the problem now is that they have now entered a position where they've got themselves in a corner. How on earth do they get out of it?
Well, if they didn't know, in the words of the late and great Scottish comedian and actor Duncan McRae, when the man says, I didn't ken, he answers, well, you ken noo. They know now, if they didn't know before, that this act is a very damaging one that has divided the country instead of uniting it, turned people against the people who decided it, has further tarnished the name of the royal family and the institution of the monarchy. How could it be otherwise? So they know now. How do they get out of it, Angus?
Agreed. And I think, again, I know your views on the monarchy. And I, as a royalist, even my loyalty has been deeply shaken by actually all the events over the last couple of years with various members of the royal family. Princess Anne, I actually would thoroughly support your campaign to make
let's get a petition up. Make Anne the next monarch.
I'm a lady who really has not put a foot wrong.
Well, I've met her. I've met her daughter. She's an outstanding figure. She works hard. She doesn't spend anything like what the others do. She's an acme of public duty. But of course, she's not next in line.
Yeah, of course. And of course, we are bound by the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. But so I think, to move the discussion on, I think we now, and I think you have talked about this earlier, we now need to look at, okay, let's be pragmatic about this, on the assumption that the palace cannot rescind this. Where do we go next? And the obvious next step is, okay, let's look at the recipient and Mr. Blair himself. Now, Mr. Blair's supporters are very vociferous and very loud in their support of Mr. Blair. They say he's a very honourable, a very decent, very principled man. Okay, well, I say to Mr. Blair, if you are that honourable, and as you've said earlier, let's spare the Queen's blushes. Do the honourable thing. Why do you need another award, especially, frankly, one that's a bauble? Because if it's conventional, so what? It doesn't mean that much to you. Turn it down. Well,
I don't know if he likes a garter around his thigh. If he does, maybe that's the attraction. But as Peter Hitchens pointed out in the paper today, is he really in need of a bauble? He can buy one on the internet. It seems a big price to pay, and we've got to make it a bigger price for him to pay to accept this award.
Absolutely. And again, I think we have to make the assumption that Mr. Blair will prove his critics right and that he won't turn this down. So we then need to look at what do we do next then as this huge, powerful, united voice across the nation. And it's very clear to me, and I've been contacted by a lot of different sides of our society who have been brilliantly supportive of this campaign. And I'll just take this moment in time to thank you, George, for your own massive support, which has done so much for the campaign. Everybody has said to me independently, look, we need our voices to be heard, not just online, but I think we need our voices to be heard out there in the streets. We have, I do understand actually, as per one of your earlier callers, I understand it is Windsor and it is June. And that does give us 6 months to start putting logistics together. Let's draw together all these fabulous sections of our society, all united in this one message. Let's draw upon that. Let's mobilize all these sections of society. Let's get them down like we did in 2003. And let's get them to march, whether it's in London, whether it's in Windsor, we can work that out. But I think we need to get this message loud and clear. We need to beat that drum as loudly until their ears ring.
Well, we'll march behind you. You're the best person to lead it. And we'll continue to publicize the petition and the action that needs to be taken. There it is now on the screen. Please, don't just sign it yourself. Make sure your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your neighbor, your workmates, get them to sign it. Let's add to this enormous, gigantic, swell upsurge of opposition that Angus has made possible by tabling this petition. So let's stay in close touch, Angus. We will do everything that we can to mobilize, but I'm glad to hear you say the online is great, but it's not enough. It's a mile wide, but it's an inch deep. We need to have people on the streets of Windsor in June. It helps. It'll be a glorious day, I can now predict. And we should make sure that we have a gigantic number of people so that if the war criminal is going to embarrass the Queen by continuing to insist that he's taking this honour, that he'll have to walk through us or be driven at speed through us first. And the whole world will see, and the royal family will see, that it was not in our name, to borrow a phrase from 15, 16 years ago. Angus, I'm so impressed by you. I'm going to install you with some very fine people in the mother of all talk shows Hall of
great. Thank
Fame.
you very much.
You are now a member of the Hall of Fame of the mother of all talk shows. If I could give you a knighthood, I would. But I feel sure that the people will agree with me that you are the people's knight. Sir Angus Scott, arise and lead us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.